Good morning.
Good morning.
So, as you heard, we have a guest speaker this morning. We want to welcome Deacon Mike Friedrich. Everybody give him a nice warm applause. So, I think I first met Mike at one of the resurrection conversations over at Lake Merritt UMC, and that was maybe 3 years ago. Mike is one of those guys who's like all over the place. I mean, he is like the DS's right arm and probably his left arm too, because he's just there to support the district and probably the conference, I should say. So he serves many, many churches. His home base is Berkeley United Methodist, correct, where he lives around the corner. He told me he's so lazy, he just gets up at the last minute and walks to church. But that's great because God uses him and plants him where God needs him most. So here he is with us to share today. Another place where I think I learned more about Mike was through this Jubilee initiative, which I read about at annual conference. And you may want to talk to him more about it because it's about microfinance loans right here in our own community that churches are doing individually or together or as groups because they want to help those who are struggling a little bit right here in our own midst. Oh, and Mike also is very heavily involved with Wadi Fu King. So he was over at the dinner at Lake Merritt again. I think he was the planner and the organizer, the event person for the whole event, He's there with the meals and the speakers and cleanup. So Mike is the guy you want to really learn from. He's God's right arm. So let's give him a warm welcome as he shares.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
You'll have to pardon my cough. Thank you for welcoming me here to your congregation, and thank you for that incredible introduction, Becky. She's covered most of what I was going to say. I am appointed by the bishop to the district, which is the district, if you don't know, called the Bridges District. It runs from Oakland and San Francisco on up I-80 to Sacramento and comprises about 90 churches. So a lot of driving. My boss, Skylar Rhodes, has assigned me to the Oakland Alameda Circuit, which includes this church, as well as Lake Merritt and Lake Park and Oakland Korean and Buena Vista and Twin Towers. I'm missing one. There's a new Cambodian fellowship I haven't been to yet. And that's how I know Pastor Emily, is through our circuit meetings. And I also know the Phantom Mary, who's standing as we speak, spiritually next to that keyboard. She was the music director of Pacific School of Religion when I went to school there. So I have some connection here already, and I look forward to having a deeper and deeper connection as the months and years go by. I tend to try to travel my own little worship circuit, so you'll see me every 3 or 4 months joining you in worship. Before I begin today, I thought I'd spend a couple of minutes describing what a deacon is in the United Methodist Church, because that's something you've probably never really run into. There are two ordained orders in the Methodist Church. We call them elders and we call them deacons. I don't know where these terms came from. You hear them around in a lot of different denominations. In some denominations, elders and deacons are not ordained. But in the Methodists, they are. In our conference is overwhelmed, which is 350 churches roughly. We have over 300 elders and maybe 10 deacons. So there aren't very many of us. Elders are mostly church pastors, but they sometimes have other roles like being a college professor. We had elders at the seminary. Deacons also tend to work in churches, but less so, but more in a support role, like being a music minister or being an education minister. But they're more likely to be involved and work out in the community, like being a chaplain. We have one other deacon in our circuit who works as a chaplain at Kaiser in San Leandro. And then there's me, who kind of is a free floater. I'm a little unusual in a lot of this respect. I have a side note about fashion. There's a slide for this, so where's our slide? There we go. So I can't explain the history of this clothing. I'm told it goes back to Roman days. But elders, if next time you see Pastor Emily, notice that her stole is two things going straight down, and that's what the elders are like. And we deacons, we tend to do this slash across the left, the chest here. Another real description that distinguishes the role of a deacon from the role of an elder is deacons tend to be people who have one foot in the world and one foot in the church. You know, the role of a pastor is really to be embedded in a church like this. You need the pastor to be with you all the time, in spirit and in body. And that's a real requirement. But there's also work in the church going on in the world. And that's how the role where deacons have tended to emerge. We started being ordained about 20 years ago, I'm told. And to recognize that there are people who are called to step aside, to be separate, who are doing God's work in the world while being in the church. I frequently think of it as a translation process. I come to this very late in my own life. My call to ministry was less than 5 years ago, and I had 2 other careers before this. And so I don't think like a pastor, and I don't think like a minister. I mean, I'm somebody who worked for a living. So there's a different lifestyle, different attitude that you have like that, and I find that missing inside most church buildings, unfortunately. And the real work of the church is not being done here right now as we speak. The real work of the church is being done in feeding the poor, clothing the needy, providing shelter for people, bringing justice to the world. And that's really where the role of a deacon can assist. So I actually think you're going to see more and more deacons called into ministry over time. I'm enough of a chauvinist to say I think we should be 90% deacons and 10% elders, but I don't think I'll live to see that day. So I attended a celebration of life gathering in San Diego a few months ago, honoring the mother of a close friend of my spouse. We got into the room where the family was gathering to set things up for the celebration, and there was clearly a lot of things that needed to get done, but nobody was really doing anything. Everyone was just kind of milling around, and nothing much was happening. And then one particular sibling showed up, and suddenly everybody was productive. You know, somebody's doing the guest book, somebody's setting up the coffee, somebody's gathering the flowers together, somebody's going around putting programs on the tables, and all the other things that needed to happen for this celebration to come together. And as it turned out, it held together very well. But I really had noticed that there was this contrast between this one family that clearly knew each other very well, but they needed this one person to show up. She wasn't the oldest. Well, she was in the middle of the birth orders. I'm the oldest in my family. I get that, but that wasn't the case here. And so I've been reflecting on leadership ever since then? I mean, what's that quality? I don't know that family, so I can't describe what was going on there. But just recognizing that leadership takes form, many, many, many different forms in our lives. And it reminded me in turn of a sermon I heard about a year ago when I was traveling to Bethlehem and on a mission trip to Wadi Fukim, which is not too far away. And you see the Church of Nativity is on the lower right, which was built in the 4th century and has been maintained ever since then to celebrate where people believe the manger was in the Christmas story. If you turn around, if you're taking the photo on the right and then just pivot 180 degrees, you have the view on the left where you see the mosque, the big mosque, and minaret and the tower, and there's the town square. And just a few blocks away, I was attending Sunday service at the Christmas Lutheran Church. There's the sign for that. And this church is, I don't know the history of this church, but it's clearly been there a few hundred years itself. While there, the pastor, using a familiar passage from John, which we just heard a moment ago, conducted an examination on leadership, which in a passage that really shows how radically different leadership under Jesus is compared to leadership in the world, particularly the political world around us. Now, those who know me well enough know that I've preached probably less times than I can count on two hands. So I'm quite happy to admit that I'm stealing most of this sermon from this pastor halfway around the world. So there are 4 leadership principles laid down in John. First, the good shepherd puts the sheep before himself, sacrifices himself if necessary. Jesus is saying a leader sacrifices his life for his followers. Think about it. This is really probably the most radical concept of all. In our world, it's the leaders who tell the followers to sacrifice their lives. It's not the other way around. This is true in the military. It's true in other aspects of our lives. It's the big executives who tell the employees they're being laid off, not us telling the boss that they're laid off. It doesn't work that way. Whoops, I have a prop that I left back here. This is our traditional world. We have the leader at the top and more people all the way down. And what Jesus is saying is turn it the other way around. The leader is not at the top of the pyramid. The leader is at the bottom. So the leader is taking on the weight of the entire organization. So it's to give a couple of examples, it's whether you're coaching a softball team or pulling together people to go to a dinner after work on Friday night, and you're coordinating it, or you're assigning chores to your kids. You're the leader. You're responsible for everything. You take that weight that everyone is going to practice right and hit the ball correctly, that they're going to come and show up at the right time. They're going to clean the dishes when they're supposed to. It's a major, you're taking on a major responsibility. Secondly, in the same way, the Father knows me, and I know the Father. Now, in English, the word father doesn't really quite get across the family connection of the original language of this passage. A more contemporary translation, it might be something like, in the same way Dad knows me and I know Dad. There's that closeness. Jesus is telling us that a good leader knows her followers in the same way that a parent knows her children, and vice versa. their strengths, you know their challenges, you know their unique talents and quirks. You're paying attention. You might be a small group leader at church. You might be conducting the youth choir. You might be in charge of the carpool going to work. You might be organizing a family picnic. Jesus is saying, pay attention. Know your people. Thirdly, there are other leadership qualities that flow from this idea as well. Jesus is saying that a good leader unites his followers and treats everyone equally. Everyone looks the same there. Unite your children into a family. You unite your movie pals into an ever deeper friendship. You unite your coworkers so that your organization or company can meet its goals. That bringing people together, treating folks the same, is a real key and difficult aspect of leadership. We all tend to have people we like more than people we don't like. And yet, at the same time, we have to treat everyone equally. And lastly, Jesus says a good leader protects her followers. No one takes them from her hand. This ties into the sacrifice quality that we talked about earlier, where you're taking on the weight of your organization. You shield your coworkers when your boss is being grumpy or nasty this morning. You keep gossip to yourself and don't spread it around. Sure, you can imagine all the different ways that your family has stress, and your role is how to relieve them from that stress, to protect them from harm. So again, these are the 4 qualities that Jesus lays out for leadership. Put your life on the line. This is serious business. Know your followers closely. Pay attention. Unite everyone. Make sure equality is the rule. Protect your people. Keep them from harm. Now, I've given small examples of how this might work, how this does work in the world. I think a larger example that in my lifetime I witnessed was the ministry of Martin Luther King in the civil rights movement in the 60s. And I'm especially reminded of the episode of his leadership of the march from Selma to Montgomery. And I won't go through the history lesson here, and I don't know how many people would remember it in any case. But there was a particular, it's worth investigating, there was a particular incident where the march came over a bridge, and they were being met with very forceful police and National Guard opposition. It's actually the sheriff and the police, not the National Guard. And in the moment, the leader had to decide what to do. There had already been one incident before Dr. King showed up, where people had attempted to march, and the same sheriff's department had beat everybody up for attempting to march. And he had to decide what to do. And a leader's got to make those kind of decisions all the time. And although everyone was revved up and ready to go, when they were ready to sacrifice themselves one more time again, on that day he turned them around. That took a lot of courage. And they were able to work out. There was a lot of negotiating going on, and I don't know whether it was that example or whatever else was going on. But the following day, they were able to march openly and with support from the police and sheriff's departments, and they were ultimately able to get their way to Montgomery. So it's very, very, his life, that's one example of it, but the life that he lived has been an example to me all of my life. And the more I study him, the more faithful I learn he was, and how rooted he was in the message of Jesus and providing the leadership that he provided. A I'll end with a couple of related observations. Erwin McManus, who's a noted Southern California pastor who's grappled with a lot of Christian questions in our postmodern world, has this to say about leaders. Leaders are people with limited talents. Limited talents. They imagine futures beyond their own personal capacity, thereby creating communities. Think about that. If you could do everything yourself, you wouldn't need to lead anybody anywhere. You'd just do it yourself. But a good leader recognizes their limitations, recognizes you can't do everything yourself, and then uses their imagination to figure out, well, you could help do this, and you could help do that, and you could help do this other thing. And that way, the task gets accomplished. And what Pastor McManus is noting is that the combination of self-awareness and imagination is how community gets built, because now you and you and you are all part of one group doing one thing. The scale doesn't matter. It can be in this church community, in this room. It can be in your family. It can be people at work. It could be in the state of California. It can be the entire globe. And finally, I've noticed there are two types of leaders: those who lead from the front and those who lead from behind. I have two pastors I know very, very well, and I won't name them, who serve locally. And one of them is someone who is definitely out in front. And I suspect your Pastor Emily is one of those. I don't know her as well. But that is basically saying, we're going to go in this direction. God is leading us here. So here's why we can go. Here's how we can all work together. Let's go this way. And other people have the same idea. It's like, we need to head over there, so let's get you guys together and you guys together. And there's more of a consensus, waiting for the moment, waiting for the body to move as a group. Might move a little slower, but then more people are engaged. And there's a risk to both. You know, if you're out front and you look behind and there's nobody behind you, you're not leading anybody. And if you wait too long to get everybody together, everybody dissipates. So there's always judgment. There's always, you have to act and all of this kind of stuff. I've been mulling over lately the value of leadership teams as opposed to in single individuals, but I think given the time today and my health, that's for another time. So let us pray. Thank you, dear God, for bringing us, for inspiring us with your personal leadership in the world 2,000 years ago, bringing us your Son, who in turn leads us by example to bring peace and justice to this world through self-sacrifice, paying attention, uniting everyone, and protecting everyone. We do all this in your name.